Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Changemakers panel. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Alice Aedy. I am delighted to be hosting today. I heard David Blaine was hosting a session here this morning, and he was sewing his lips shut, but I reckon that's got nothing on the panel we're about to see. You can imagine how delighted I was when I was asked to curate a panel of extraordinary women. They're an accomplished bunch. Collectively, they have 29 awards, including 12 Cannes Lions, 5 Emmy Awards, and yes, those 3 letters, an MBE. Please give a very, very warm welcome to Sharmadean Reid, Zing, Hind Hassan, and Sarah Mossis. We were joking backstage, is this the girl band that never existed, but the world has always needed? Hi, guys. Welcome to Sheffield.
Hi.
So for anyone in the audience, you might have noticed a change to the panel lineup. Unfortunately, Monroe can't be with us today. We're sending her all our love. But we're very grateful that this woman who loves a challenge, Sarah Mossis, has stepped in. So thank you, Sarah.
Pleasure.
So why Changemakers? Well, I didn't mean it just in the traditional sense of the word, people who are creating change as advocates, whilst each of them have undoubtedly done that. But because each of them has, in their own right, responded by necessity or opportunity to this dizzyingly fast-changing landscape by cleverly pivoting, reimagining their roles, or innovating in their industries. So Hind, Zing, Sarah, and Shah, they've each built their careers in different lanes: journalism, documentary film, tech. Their mediums may differ, but I think they'll agree they found a common ground and a deep belief in the power of story to challenge the status quo, imagine, and build new futures. I don't think I need to tell this audience that we're living through a time of converging crises, from conflict and climate collapse to disinformation and a distribution crisis. There is certainly no shortage of stories to tell. The question is how to bring them to life in a landscape that feels more challenging, but perhaps more ripe with possibility than ever. You are definitely some of the most insightful minds I could think of to gather and explore what needs to change. And also, not all bad, the exciting new models that are emerging already. So trust me, this conversation could have gone a million different directions given the breadth of their experience. But for the purpose of this conversation, which is an hour, we're going to focus on 3 existential challenges or opportunities that sit across these industries. So 1, funding and commissioning; 2, audience and attention; and 3, new models and new approaches. At the end, we'll have 15 minutes for questions. You could submit them via Slido, or we'll have 3 mics roaming the audience. Let's do this. So I want everyone to get to know you a bit. Storytelling is a common thread, though it's manifested itself in different ways. Let's start with you, Zing. You're a journalist, author, presenter. You worked as editor-in-chief for Vice, and in 2020 you won an award at the British Journalism Awards, and I loved how they described you: one-woman multimedia practitioner, epitomizing the strengths of modern journalism.
Yeah, no pressure there. Yeah.
So tell me how you came to journalism and what that title even means.
I was a failed advertising person. I went for grad schemes in advertising when I was at university, didn't get anywhere. This was around the time of the financial crisis. And then I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go back to university and do a journalism degree, because that was the only thing that seemed like it was on the table for someone who'd like to write and be creative, but also couldn't really get a job in the place that she wanted to go.
But at City, I don't think anyone considers a journalism degree at City as remotely a failure in any way. You got the best school ever.
And I can't say that because I'm also teaching some of the students at City right now. So it's in my interest not to say that.
Shah, you are multi-business founder at this point. Nails, Beauty Stack, The Stack World. Every business that you've built has worked on the sort of economic agency of women through storytelling in some ways. How have you done it? And thank you for being here, because I think you're bringing a business brain to an industry that doesn't always think that way.
So I've always been obsessed with magazines and print and storytelling from forever. I was always obsessed with cable TV especially. But I actually studied fashion communication at Central St Martin's, so it was a lot of rapid writing, reporting on either shows or art exhibitions or things that were happening in culture. When I was at university, I made my first magazine myself when I was 20, did everything from the interviews and the design. I taught myself Adobe InDesign, and that was effectively my first foray into how do I tell women's stories, because it was exclusively about women in hip-hop, and it was in 2005, and it was like a fun little thing I did to teach myself every single skill. And I was saying to the panel in the green room, I've always dabbled in media throughout the things that I've done in business. Whenever I start a business, it's really important for me to have a storytelling arm for that business. But actually more and more with the tools that are available today, I'm seeing that actually no one needs to dabble in it anymore. It can be a core part of the business function.
Zing, after City, you would end up being at Vice. What's happened there the past few years?
I mean, what haven't? Apparently, there's a documentary coming out about it.
Really?
Yeah, by Eddie Wang. Yeah. So I joined Vice initially as the UK editor of Broadly, and this we can definitely talk about this because this was a really interesting funding model. They wanted to set up a new website, or they called it a vertical, for women's interest, and they got funding from Unilever, like a multi-million-dollar partnership to fund the creation of essentially a completely new women's publication. So that was at the point at which I got brought into Vice to spearhead the UK launch of Broadly.
Okay. Sarah,
Hi.
tell us, you're also sitting across the industry in different ways, but why impact storytelling? I'm pretty sure you were one of the first sort of official impact storytellers. What does that mean, and how did you find your way there?
I think we'll all admit that the world's pretty grim right now, and making a film is really hard, releasing a film is really hard, marketing a film is really hard. And I think if you're going to put that effort and time and skill towards something, I think it's really important in the current market to do it for something that's hopefully going to make a change. When I started in the industry 16 years ago, the first time I came to Sheffield Doc First, I used to work for Doc Society earlier on in my career, and it was the emerging moment when the kind of UK and European landscape were kind of becoming aware of vocabulary around what impact filmmaking was. It had been a kind of an area of expertise in the US market for a longer time. And so I kind of entered the industry at this point where we were saying, like, what is the purpose for the media and the stories that we're telling, and how do we resource that, how do we fund it? I came in and have supported an event called The Good Pitch, which was the first pitching forum specifically for impact media, and it was engaging NGOs, philanthropists, high net worth individuals, and brands to come around impactful stories. And it was a very empowering moment that was sort of needed, and it's really quite perplexing to see now, like 15 years later, the world in which we are living in and how impact media could not be more vital. So I spend every waking minute of my days working on some of the most kind of like difficult stories around human rights, social justice, environmental issues. I probably make a lot more money working for Disney or other places selling fun family films, but I feel in the current moment that we're in, impact stories need to be seen, need to be heard, and need to be embraced in a cultural landscape.
Hind, speaking of impactful storytelling, you're a journalist born in Iraq, raised in Hull. How did you find your path to journalism?
Well, as you mentioned, born in Iraq, so we came to the UK. I was very young, I was like 3 years old maybe, and I grew up watching Western news on Iraq. So watching the Iran-Iraq war, the Gulf War, just invasion after war, after conflict, and so I kind of had a unique insight in that. I had information as to what people were experiencing in Iraq, family members of mine, people who were close to my family, and then also what I was watching on TV and how things were being covered. And so I had this, I think, just desire to be able to tell the stories of people who were struggling in conflicts, the most vulnerable in society, and kind of deal with the power imbalances that you often see. I actually ended up studying medicinal chemistry at university during the 2003 invasion. So I don't know if you were all, alive at that time. I don't know, but there was a very famous man called Chemical Ali, who apparently was behind the chemical weapons of Iraq. And I was studying chemistry, so people would say, like, where are you from? What do you study? And I was like, Iraq, chemistry. So anyway, that was short. I wasn't very good at it as well. So I then went off and studied a master's in broadcast journalism, and kind of was always led by those images and those memories that I have. And now it's kind of full circle because of what we've been seeing on the news over the past few years and thinking about all those young people who are sat in front of their TVs and watching the way that the news is playing out and how that is probably going to shape their lives and how they see things as well.
It's just thinking of your short conversation around chemistry work. It's also a short conversation when you start talking about climate change at a dinner party. People go, yeah, cool. It's my neighbor. Okay, let's dive into funding and commissioning. So how do we bring this work to life, as we mentioned, and I think this has been the subject of many conversations this week. It's a really tough landscape. I know that myself, being at the sharp end of climate storytelling. Sarah, you've touched on it and kind of established a landscape around impact storytelling, but can you give us a wider lay of the land around independent doc and the industry right now? Why are things difficult and particularly difficult right now?
Yeah, sort of like a market economics point. So there are producers working in film and TV that are doing pretty good. They're doing well. They are responding to what the market is wanting to consume, which maybe, as we've heard in different buzzword conversations this week, true crime or celeb-driven kind of projects or IP-linked. There's a market there, there's an audience there, there's a consumer space there, and then naturally there are funders who are able to then fund that work because it's meeting a market demand. Many of the films that we work on are not necessarily responding to a market demand culture. So when you're looking at a piece of work that's pushing ideas about human rights or breaking a story about democracy in crisis in different regions, there's not necessarily a buyer being like, oh, I desperately want that one. Like, that's the one I've been looking for everywhere, because it's not necessarily a market economic match in the current moment. So what a lot of impact storytellers have to do, especially in the feature landscape, is find a variety of different financial supporters around their projects. So this might be funds and foundations, so people like Doc Society, Sundance, Chicken and Egg. It might be high net worth individuals. Sometimes that's granting or investment in the project. Sometimes it's brand funding. We've done multiple projects with Patagonia. They're probably one of the best in-class brands there is in the world. They fully finance 3 environmental projects that we've worked on, and then also fully finance the marketing distribution of those, which we'll come back to later in terms of the utter importance of that part of the equation. And then some of those independent films will also have maybe a commissioner from a different broadcast channel or have some kind of pre-sales. If you fully independently finance without any distributor in that financing mix, there's obviously no guarantee that anyone will actually acquire it. So if you've got no acquirer, the investment becomes super risky in the product because they're never going to make a return if nobody acquires it. But also nobody might see it because you haven't got anything there. So it's sort of this market kind of issue that we're all grappling with, and it's just got worse and worse the last few years in particular. So there was a very public panel here a few days ago about some of the issues around the BBC and the Gaza project recently, of even when you have secured those funds, is the channels or are the distributors able to even release it in that moment? So there's a number of different sort of fracture states we're seeing across the industry, which are combining to, in some ways, suppress the kind of vital voices that we need to be supporting, and amplifying more of the stuff that, it's great to watch. I watch those programs too. The Celeb, it's amazing. But sort of we need to find a rebalance of where the resourcing is going and the space and distribution for those titles.
And I think I was on a similar panel, and one director said there's a kind of climate of fear in the industry. There's a lower risk appetite in commissioners for those political kind of docs. But Hind, what are you experiencing, particularly in relation, I guess, to the extensive work you do on issues like Gaza?
Oh, God, I think everyone's been talking about it since we've been here, right? Everyone you meet, the minute you start talking about documentary and news doc, everyone says it's the same thing. It's so difficult, I left Vice. I was working at Vice as well with Zing, and we left Vice, and then a lot of people from Vice went to Scripps, and Scripps were making similar documentaries to Vice, and everyone was going there, and it was great, and then they folded. Their documentary department closed. And it's just getting funding for documentary for the type of news docs that we do, which are longer form up to feature length, is just incredibly difficult. I'm in a very, very lucky situation in that I work a lot with Al Jazeera and their brilliant teams, and we've made docs for Fault Lines, People and Power, and now with the team based in London, we have a series coming out in August. And so I have been very, very blessed in that environment that I've been able to get items, get documentaries commissioned and get things done. But it's also been very difficult because a lot of the work that I do is in the Middle East. And then getting a documentary commissioned that you really, really believe in. So for example, we had an idea for a documentary that we really wanted to do and spoke to multiple people about it. It was about, I'll say it now, it's fine. It's about pregnant women in Gaza. And I was working with a colleague of mine in New York, and we really believed passionately about this project. We spoke to lots of different people, collected information, and we wanted to really tell that story because it's so powerful, distressing, everything you can imagine. Like what we were hearing about Palestinian women who were pregnant, the malnutrition, the inability to get formula, the stillborn death, sorry, trigger warning. I shouldn't say it afterwards, but it was very, very, really, really something that we really wanted to do, really believed in, and we couldn't get it commissioned. And we spoke to people, and there was definitely interest, but I think people kind of had the capacity to cover one Gaza documentary or had the budget for, one Gaza documentary is already being commissioned. Sorry, we don't have any room for you. We don't have the budget for it. And so, it's kind of difficult because a lot of the times you're making films within the framework of what the network wants or what they're looking at. And I mean, at the moment, like I say, I'm still in a very privileged position in that I have been able to make films that I believe in, but it is very, very difficult at the moment.
You have continued to make great work. Can you add a bit of context? Tell us about the project.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank you for the applause, because that applause isn't for me. That applause is for the journalists that worked on there, the Palestinian journalists who are inside Gaza, for Hussein Jaber, who filmed those opening scenes, who witnessed his own daughter being killed by Israeli gunfire in December 2023, who then went on months later to document other people's trauma despite what he'd witnessed himself. So that's for him, so I really appreciate that. Yeah. I get very emotional talking about them because it's still happening now. It's so important, and every panel, that we have, these journalists that are working to this day after so many months, and the work that they do and the professionalism that they do it with and the incredible cinematography. It's just something that I'm just so proud of, that we get to work with them. But that's actually 2 clips from the film Starving Gaza. And this is why I'm very grateful to Al Jazeera for them to give us this platform, and also for Leila Al-Aryan, who is the executive producer of that. It makes such a, it's so impactful being able to work with a American Palestinian woman on something like this, and to be able to have those ideas and talk to them about it. So the first clip is from Kamal Adwan Hospital, which was filmed in Gaza, and the filmmakers that we worked with, they went to Kamal Adwan Hospital, and they filmed there with the doctors, and what you don't see is the difficulty in doing that. There were weeks where we didn't speak to them, we didn't know where they were, we'd lost communication with them. It's not just so easy that they can turn up and embed for a week and film in a hospital. Very often, if you get access to the hospital, that's the hard part done. It's not the hard part here. Kamal Adwan Hospital was bombed in the middle of filming. And so they had to evacuate a lot of people. There were we were filming there, and I remember switching on my phone and seeing footage of beds being pushed through the streets of Gaza, Kamal Adwan Hospital beds. And I was like, right, okay, we hadn't heard from the film crew, so we knew that something was happening. So that is kind of telling the story of the people inside Gaza, and then we took that information, and we worked with them, and we took that to Washington, and that was the accountability arm. Who I was speaking to was Stacey Gilbert, who's a former State Department official who had resigned over what she said was a falsified report that absolved Israel of any blame for the starvation. We are now in 2025, in the summer, where it's now openly accepted that starvation is being used as a tactic of war. But back then, even though we saw it, even though the human rights organizations were saying it, even though the forensic experts were saying it, wasn't something that was, had pierced through the political systems.
You mentioned how grateful you were to have a Palestinian exec. I wonder if you could each share the ways in which there are still barriers to entry in terms of representation, elitism, the gatekeeping, and how that's playing out for each of you.
I'll be really quickly and let you talk, but I guess twofold. What we're witnessing during this period is, and it has been going on for some years, attacks against journalists. And what we're seeing in Gaza and journalists being killed, that will have affects all over the world. Other states could potentially look and think we can get away with this. And so I think that's very dangerous. And then also for us journalists who come from a particular background, reporting on these stories, it's also been a very difficult time for them. People who work in some of the legacy media or otherwise say that they are struggling, that they're afraid of being side-eyed, that they are afraid of being able to tell the stories in the way that they believe to be completely honest because of retribution. And so I think that is something that we're really grappling with now. But then overall, as an industry, I think the issue goes back like a lot further. And I always say this whenever I'm on panels, but journalism remains one of the most elitist industries that exists. It has a disproportionate number of people that come from private school backgrounds. If you don't represent society, how can you expect to be able to deliver the stories as effectively as you can? And that's not to say, obviously I have incredible journalist friends and colleagues, and there are brilliant minds that we work with, but I think when we need to punch through and really understand what true diversity means. And it doesn't just necessarily mean representation how we look, but economic representation from different backgrounds, and being able to have people who have really had life experiences and be able to relate to the people that they're talking to and embedding with. I said I wasn't going to talk much, and then I started.
No, can I follow on from that as well? So I have had the pitching and funding experience from a venture capital point of view for my businesses, and it's probably not too dissimilar to what you guys experience for your work. And I cannot even fathom that you couldn't get a documentary about pregnant women in Gaza commissioned, because that is a story, to me, that needs to be told. And it goes back to the elitism, who gets to tell the stories, but also the experience, not just the market need, but the personal experience of the people who are the check writers or commissioners. So I constantly talk in my office about the fact that, because I've got a 14-year-old son who's been obsessed with World War II since he was born, I was like, there is so much World War II content, I can't believe it, yet there are so few stories, for example, of what was it like to have a period on a slave ship? What was it like to give birth on a slave? I don't think I've ever seen that on screen. I don't think I've seen pregnancy on screen in almost any war film in general. I don't think you see what it's like for the female experience in the entire historical narrative of either documentary or fiction filmmaking. So if we did nothing else today apart from remake every story from a female point of view, that alone would shift the narrative massively. So I want to see that. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, and it's the same in it really talks to the people you're working with. So having a EP who understands the experience and story, I think is why, a lot of my work is about having more women in leadership, more women in power, more women economically empowered, and more women able to be patrons and funders of the stories that should be told. Because if I have another World War II documentary, babes, no offence if anyone's made one, by the way.
You reminded me once of a conversation we had, I can't remember the name of the business, but you said it's no surprise this business wasn't of interest to the VC funders because it was an amazing business around breastfeeding. Can you remind me of that?
Yeah, so I angel invest in a lot of female businesses, and one of them I invested in is a company called Swell, where they go into hospitals and support women breastfeeding, or if they don't want to breastfeed, they connect them with formula, nutritional. And it's just, it's interesting to watch I don't just invest in women because I wouldn't make any money. That's the crazy thing about it, right? It's like, she doesn't get the support, and I watch a male founder I've invested in who does something like a male fertility drug, get crazy amounts of support. And it's just like, it's so unevenly balanced. And I think if I can take my success from these investments and pour it into these investments over here, it's the redistribution of wealth that I'm very, very preoccupied by. I'm like, we don't have to ignore the tactics of hyper-capitalists or the tactics, like we said, of extreme right-wing people or extreme interest groups. We need to learn from those and think, well, how can we apply them to the things that we think are important for the planet and the world? Do you get what I mean? So I always like to have my foot in both doors of creativity and commerce, because they need to be symbiotic, and the redistribution of wealth needs to change from the elitists. I'm from Wolverhampton, and for I think 20 years in London, I still get asked where you're from, and they don't mean the Jamaican side, of course. They're like, you're from Birmingham, and they think they have this perception of being common, or, do you get what I mean? Like, a perception of incapability, and I just think this needs to change. It's what I'm very obsessed with.
Yeah, there's actually a really funny story I was talking about with the panel backstage, which was, so I've got a friend who works for the New York Times, and she went to the New York office and realized that almost all the British people in New York were from the North, and she's Scouts, and she went around, she was asking these like 50-something-year-old journalists from the Midlands, from like Liverpool, being like, why are you guys all here? And they looked at her and they were like, we couldn't get jobs in the media back when we were your age. We had to leave America, we had to leave the UK to America, where they can't understand the difference between northern and southern accents. And they gave us jobs based on talent, because they just looked at us and thought we were English. So, you know, that just says everything. But I think there's also the one attitude that pervades a lot of industries, and this isn't just in the media, but also in VC funding, is this kind of one and done attitude. So it's like, oh, we've already hired someone who's LGBTQ+. We don't need another one. We already hired the one like Asian journalist. We don't need another one. We've already done a story about Gaza. We don't need another one. Or we've already funded a women-run kind of tech company, so we don't need another one. So it's this kind of attitude where it's like a kind of box-ticking exercise, where it's like we want to have the veneer of kind of liberal progress, where we support all the right causes, but we only really want to take a punt on one. And if that one then fails, then we're like, we write it off and say, there's no market for it, it failed, we're not going to invest in another story or a person like this.
I think what's really annoying about that is I'll never question funding 10 boys called Tom. It's like you can have 10 of the same human, and that's fine, but the diversity tick box is like a little one. And I was going to say that the opportunity for failing upwards that we seem to have in our society for a certain demographic, I'll be very clear in saying I think Boris Johnson's a total idiot. He's been fired from every job he's ever had, and was still allowed to become Prime Minister. If a woman or someone from an ethnic minority or from a different accent, whatever it might be, that level of failure is not accepted in that profession, whereas a certain class of what we see in the UK society can fail upwards at speed and never be stopped. And it comes to economic distribution and also just the opportunity for different access to different individuals. And I find just Boris is like the perfect example of what a mess he is, but he has never stopped on his progression to the uttermost high point of authority in the UK context.
So one other thing about that, the one and done on the diversity and diverse stories, is if you look at it from the perception of also the founder or creative, it puts a huge pressure on that person to represent their entire community. When the black experience is not a monolith, the woman or female experience is not a monolith, the experience of someone going through a trauma is not a monolith, and that means that the creative or the expression then becomes watered down itself, because it has to appeal to everybody. So I think that one and done damages all sides, actually. You don't get diverse content, but if that founder or filmmaker or creative fails, it destroys their spirit as well as the spirit of the rest of the community, if you get what I'm saying. Sorry. It was really stressful for me, because I was one of the first black women to raise venture capital. One of the reasons why I didn't shut down my business during the pandemic when I should have done was because I was paranoid about, well, if I fail, no other black women will get funded, and that responsibility itself led to my burnout. And I'm sure many of you in this room have experienced creative burnout, and it's because of that mental pressure.
And then
whereas the 10 Toms that you mentioned don't have
absolutely
that.
Fine.
And then you have that subliminal thing in your mind where it's like, okay, I'm that person, but I need to fit in your box.
Yeah.
And so that's why you end up seeing, perhaps just the same kind of opinion or background and not true representation of what it is. Totally agree.
Sure. I want you to share a bit of the news that you received yesterday. We're going to come on to conversation around ownership, but just when you're not seeing the stories that you want to be told, when you see that systems are broken, you build businesses, build a new table. But tell me about why you've built it yourself.
Yeah, so for just a little bit of background, so I raised venture capital in 2017-18 to create a beauty booking system that was based on visual beauty. A big part of our platform was the storytelling and the content and the editorial. And then when the pandemic happened, we couldn't book beauty. We had made a couple of like short film interviews with beauty therapists done in a really beautiful style, and we just couldn't do anything. So after 9 months of beauty being closed, we decided to pivot into dropping the beauty and focusing just on the media and storytelling. So then we moved Beauty Stack into the Stack world using the same team and tech. Now, there's several points. Firstly, venture capitalists don't like media. Most people don't like funding media, as you all know. It's very hard to get media funded, particularly if someone is far more interested in a technology-based platform than a storytelling platform. But then the other thing was, it just felt like tech didn't see us as serious tech because we were doing the media, and then media don't see us as serious media because we've got this like tech cap table, and the whole thing was super hard. In addition, I personally was just experiencing burnout, having probably worked since I was 14 years old, and it got to a point where I was like, actually, I'm just going to shut it down and see what happens and maybe start again. So I left London. I was in London for 20 years. That's how I know you guys, the scene. And I moved back to Wolverhampton a year and a half ago. I've been basically resting, sleeping, hanging out with family and eating. And then I was like, actually, I might just buy this back. So we shut down the Stack world as a venture-backed business. I bought the intellectual property back and just signed the contract only yesterday, so this is very fresh. And without having a certain type of funder on my cap table and board, it now really frees me up to think, if I were to build a women's media company from scratch and not have to pander to what an investor wants as a high-growth, high-return company, what would that look like? And something I've always thought about is, why are journalists not incentivized with company ownership? I've never understood that. So if you are a big part of the content, why do you not? I don't understand why you don't own the business. Like just because I'm a founder, I've always been like, why would I work for you if you're not going to give me a piece of the pie? It blows my mind. So one of the things we've discussed, and I've looked into lots and lots of different company models, like writers' cooperatives, which have existed for a very, very long time. What would it look like if the employee share ownership, if 20% of the company was owned by employees, and those employees were the journalists? And it's really interesting because you spoke about Patagonia as a funder earlier. There are actually so many companies, especially in Scandinavia, that have foundations who are on the board. So, for example, Rolex, not many people know, a big chunk of the company is owned by a foundation that has to distribute their grants. So is Lego. There's probably about 50 household name companies that you know where 10 to 20% of the company is owned by a foundation and has to give money out. And I think that's how all companies should be. I think that, if we are going to redesign what capitalism looks like, we have to actively do it from the point of inception. So yeah, when I relaunch this new media company, probably in 9 to 12 months, I expect all of my journalists and writers and directors and producers to have equity in the company and be part of the success story if and when it exits. Mm.
You mentioned companies, yes, round of applause.
And you can quote me on that, on the point of sale.
Yeah, they're all coming after you. That doesn't happen. Zing, you led the editorial team at Vice. You were working on branded content. It was interesting. I think there was one of the first ever, don't quote me on this, but panels around branded content at Sheffield. It's definitely like people are turning their gaze there. thinking is this additional routes to funding. How did it work at Vice, and how did you keep the editorial integrity? Many of the concerns that...
I'm not going to lie, it was difficult. So I mentioned broadly being funded by Unilever.
Yeah.
And this was like a massive deal. It was announced in the trade press. And it was really complicated because essentially Unilever was giving us all this money to hire journalists. We probably scaled up way too fast. So, within a year, we had like editors in places like Australia. And then there came all these kind of strings attached, right? So it's like we were running stuff that was freaking out the company. The company would try and like talk to us about the kind of editorial we're running. Obviously, as journalists, we were then basically like, fuck off. It was hard. And to be honest, like doing it again, I would have, Unilever was the ones who came along, and they specifically said, we want to fund a women's media company. It would have been much better if it was with someone like Patagonia, like a B Corp, basically, that had kind of these kind of central values and an ethos where they couldn't come to us and say, we're freaked out that you ran a story about abortion, or something like that. So I think that is the one thing that I would advise people to be cautious about. Like, there is a lot of money out there, but always, always look at the strings attached, look at, what the expectations are, get them laid out really, really clearly, and don't be blinded by the big money sum, because at any point they can just pull that money. It's not unheard of for like companies to just yank funding from media companies. That's exactly what happened to Broadly. That's what happened to Vice. So I think that if you are going after that branded money, be very, very clear about your own boundaries and be clear about the company's boundaries and where they lie, because there's so much potential conflict and tension that lies between those two poles. And honestly, sometimes it's just not worth the late nights that you stay up trying to figure out a way to appease someone that you've never met in an American office who holds the purse strings of your operation.
Yeah, and unfortunately there are not enough Patagonias out there, but hopefully more and more. Okay, time is flying. We need to move on to sort of the attention economy, the role of social media. Funding, commissioning is just the beginning of a difficult journey. So how do we get our stories to be then distributed, to be seen, to find their audience and compete in that attention economy? Zing, I want to come back to you. There must have been pressure for eyeballs and virality, both at Vice and now in the work that you're doing. How does that shape the editorial and the work that you make?
I mean, the internet is, as always, at fault, because I remember coming into journalism when hits were just everything, and I had friends who left journalism school and literally just did clickbait photo galleries of celebrity nipple slits for supposedly feminist women's magazines, and they would find all kinds of special magical ways of saying like, ooh, Lily Allen had a peekaboo moment, and it was literally just to appease people who were Googling Lily Allen nip slit. It was just vile stuff. And then you saw it change from, just chasing hits alone through Google to the pivot to video. And this is where I think the fault really lies at companies like Meta, because all these media companies, Vice included, went to Meta, and Meta was like, guys, we are pivoting to video. It's all about video. Change your teams, change the structure of your company, invest in video, and we will reward you with traffic, we'll reward you with advertising money. And the whole thing was just propped up on just a pyramid of lies. Like, years later, it was exposed that they were just artificially inflating the number of views that videos were getting on Facebook. And in the meantime, all these companies had completely changed their structures, let people go, hired entirely new departments, then had to let those departments go because the advertising money just completely cratered out and didn't materialize. So I think in many ways, the real story is like the internet and how the media industry has been kind of hoodwinked by these tech companies, really, and has no way to kind of hold these companies to account, and that they've kind of gobbled up the attention and the eyeballs of the vast public at media's expense. And I think that is something that people are slowly starting to fight back against, because without kind of advertising money, without eyeballs, without things going viral and people watching your content, media is just going to die.
Obviously, Sarah, coming to you, social is flawed in many ways, but I would certainly say severely underestimated perhaps by the doc industry and independent docs, not least with the distribution crisis. I want to share some stats. 15,000 films submitted to Sundance, 30 docs screened, only 2 got distribution, leaving many brilliant sort of orphaned films. Where have you seen best case studies or best examples of social being leveraged to find audiences for films that don't get traditional distribution but have been successful nonetheless?
Yeah, the stats are pretty depressing on viewership things.
Give us hope.
There's definitely hope. So I think one thing we talk to a lot of our producers about is audience planning is essential. Business planning as your role as a producer is essential. So my favorite sentence at a festival, someone's pitching me, which happens frequently, who's your target audience? And the number of times I get, well, you know, just like everyone. What's that? I say all the time, a film for everyone is a film for absolutely no one. It is physically impossible to create a film that every single person in this room is going to fall in love with. It's physically impossible to do that on a massive scale. You have to be clear on the fact that, yes, your film can appeal to a wider sense of audience, but it has to have a kind of focus on who it's trying to speak to, and the language that you use, the tone of voice that you use. And then even when you have that real clarity of thought in terms of the target audience you're presenting, in any business methodology, like I'm a total business geek and I read basically everything not about the film industry, I read about other verticals, other businesses. In any product launch or any marketing campaign, there's a theory called the 1-9-90 complex, which is like a triangle. So imagine like 1% at the top, 9%, 90%. 1% of your target audience, your very, very clarified target audience, will do the thing you actually want them to do. So when Nike launches a shoe, 1% of people in their very, very targeted advertising campaign will click through, see the shoe, buy their kind of size, and actually buy it. When you look at a film context, that's 1% of people actually sitting down for 90 minutes and watching that entire film. So if all of your investment, all of your time and focus is going to the thing that only 1% of your target market will be doing, you're missing out on 99% worth of engagement that might be possible. So this is where you need to have short-form cut-down versions. This is why we have trailers. Like the amount of virality that trailer views have compared to the viewership and box office of a film is sometimes 100 times or 1,000 times magnified than the viewership of the film. So as producers, when you think of yourself as a business, audience planning is essential, and then building up a kind of communications ecosystem around your film is even more essential than making the first film in its kind of entirety. So every single filmmaker should have in their budgets not only a cut for the trailer version, you need cut-down versions that work vertically for TikTok and Instagram. You need 2-minute versions, 5-minute versions, a 10-minute version. If I'm going into a school, the average school lesson in the UK is 40 minutes long. I cannot screen an hour-and-a-half film in a 40-minute lesson. I need a 20-minute version. So you have to sort of see yourself this, like, we have all these different words for it, like a multimedia journalist, like multimedia creator. There's lots of different language, but effectively, if you only pivot your entire viewing experience by the long-form version, you are missing out on millions and millions and millions of viewers that need to be seen. So when I ask you that question in the bar afterwards, who's your target audience, have an answer and be kind of well-versed in it, and then think about the different formats of your content that you can put out. Because even you look at the Disney releases, Universal releases, Warner releases, those trailers are getting 5 million, 10 million, 100 million views. And you look at the box office, and it might have been 100,000 people. So we collectively in industry, we can't grow our documentary audiences unless we grow the platforms and the spaces that we're operating in, and not driving everybody into a cinema only, but seeing that other digital spaces are really essential.
And just that story, just to emphasize that story universe point, having been on wanting myself to share people's films because I'm a fan, I want to amplify them. I need the assets in the right dimension, and I think finding more links between the way that the people with platforms, the creator economy meets film, I think we need to get smarter about that. The other day, I want to give a shout out to an amazing film, Yanuni, if you haven't seen it, but they have brilliant assets and they're going out to market, and it makes such a big difference.
I was going to say,
you want to say something else?
Is Jeannie Finley in the room? No. Okay. Has anyone seen the film Your Fat Friend? Raise hands. Great. So I say that because Jeannie is a freaking genius. So Jeannie Finley's a director, and she is one of the most prolific directors in the UK market. She's made now 9 feature films, which is incredible. And we have a film called Your Fat Friend on our sales agency side. But the success of that film is down to Jeannie, without doubt. Like, we did our part. We sold the film to multiple countries. It's out in cinemas in Australia and Scandinavia and other places. But the reason that film did what it did is because Jeannie is obsessed with the different kinds of content, how to use social. Like, let's be honest, guys, how to have good graphic design. Like, the amount of times we get sent a film, like, we've got like an asset pack, and it's terrible. Like, terrible fonts, terrible look and feel. The key images are really blurry, no one can see them. Jeannie really understood how the kind of look and feel. And if you go, I would advise all of you to look at the Your Fat Friend Instagram page in terms of like a best-in-class version of how you can create like really creative storytelling through your socials that drives actual conversion. So Your Fat Friend, Julie did a case study at South by Southwest London about this. We can't disclose publicly how much money the film made, but I can say it's made a ridiculous amount of money for a documentary in the current market. And it's down to the testament of Jeannie understanding her audience, understanding how digital works, playing into all the trends that are happening on social. Like, social's not a stagnant thing where you can just say, hey, here's a trailer, watch it. It's like, what's the trending elements on digital that you can play into? And she really dove into that and had significant financial return because of a digital-first understanding that I would say, in a very kind way to all of us in this room, many people here really don't get. Like, it's quite shocking, the lack of understanding of the basics of social.
Yeah, and I guess also filmmakers don't think of their films as products, and maybe that makes people cringe and shudder, but I think that shift in perspective is important. What can we learn, Shah?
Well,
I'm seeing you itch to say something, but both on understanding your film as a product, understanding marketing, but also knowing your audience.
When you were saying about having 30-second cut downs, I was thinking, is that not normal?
Oh, mate,
and,
no.
I think this is the thing about me being an outsider to the industry. I'm just like always questioning the way that things have been done and why are you doing it like that. There's a couple of things I want to say. Firstly, I want to have compassion for a creative that they shouldn't actually have to be a business person. And I always feel I am that person who is left and right-brained, and I can be creative and business, but I don't think everyone should be or have to be, and I don't think after you've poured your heart into a film and a script, you should then have to think about marketing. But that's why being at events like this, building your network and building your collaborative team is really key, because it's amazing that she can do that, but not everyone can do that, and it's really hard to ask that of everybody. One of the things I will say about the, sorry, it's just taking it back a little bit to what Zing said about the branded content element, is I feel like that when you work with brands, sometimes it's just about telling the story you want to tell on someone else's money. You know, so like we made some branded content for a company day. I don't know if you can show the clip. And actually they hated it because it wasn't viral. They wanted someone running around on the street, you know, dressed in a tampon, like interviewing. And I wanted to tell these really intentional, beautiful stories about what it's like to have your first period. But we got paid and the story got out, and then they did use it and it didn't go very far, but I felt like what we'd done in that moment and with that story was really important, and I'll build on it again and again and again. So I think it's like a double-edged sword. It's like taking the money to tell the story that you want to tell, and then also not giving a shit if they don't like it, if you can move on to the next thing. But on the business as product and the eyeballs and the audience eyeballs. So when I started the Stack World, I read this book called The Merchants of Truth. I don't know if anyone's read that. It's the story of Vice, Washington Post, New York Times, Vice, and BuzzFeed. And it's a brilliant book because it takes these 4 companies in 3 different points in their history when it went from print media to eyeballs, as you said, the obsession with eyeballs, and then their true transition to digital, and shows the evolution of the technology, the company structure, the way that journalism was commissioned. You see this evolution, right? And I realized very quickly, and then after that book, I also read Ben's, the BuzzFeed editor's Traffic book, which was all about how, we have to make content for eyeballs and it gets addictive. So I read these 2 books. And I was like, okay, so the issue is we have to make watered down content for the widest audience possible, which is impossible, as you said, in order to get advertiser money. I was like, what if we turned it on its head and we actually built the tiniest audience possible, but we knew everything about them? So when an advertiser came to us, we didn't ever launch display ads just because of time. But if an advertiser came to us, so for example, Nike would come to us and they would say, we need 25 women who are interested in fashion, fitness, and beauty. I have that audience data because it's only recently that, for example, Vogue started a subscription. Vogue had no clue who its reader was, because it could be anyone, you're just using it off cookie data. I was like, right, everything's behind a paywall. Everything has to be with a subscription. Every person has to fill out a profile. So if you're, imagine if you've had a profile on Netflix. We collected 24 data points. We knew not only age, location, but what their job was, what they were curious about, and we actually had 3 unstructured data points, which were questions of, what's your favorite quote? What do you want to talk about? So then we were gathering all of this stuff. So if a girl said, I want to talk about green tea, manga, and postpartum depression, we would have that data and then write articles about those things. Do you get what I mean? So it was a full circle. We were using our audience on a high-touch way to gather insights, to then make content, to then go to brands and say, we have those exact 25 women actually, and now you have to pay us 5 times of what you paid everyone else because I'm able to select them for you and then invite them to an event. Do you get what I'm saying? So we did that successfully. The thing that I'm going to do now, though, is flip it to the other side, which is being on YouTube, being on social, and pushing the content out. But I think what media companies have a challenge with is they start with everything free to begin with, then it relies on advertisers and brands and commissioners, whereas we've started the other way, which is we have a subscription-based platform. It's highly paywalled and locked in, but when we expand it, I think even more money will come. I think.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned subscription model. We've mentioned kind of multi-format. There are new models emerging, right? I wonder, I know that you've started doing direct-to-consumer creative video, social video. Both of you have. What are some of the exciting things that you're seeing right now, specifically for journalists?
Yeah, so I think for the longest time, journalism, especially in the UK, was really sniffy about social as video, and they kind of regard it as not real journalism. But then, when you speak to people Gen Z and younger, so I teach a model at City University of the journalism department, and it's really great. It's great to be among 21-year-olds who are passionate about journalism. They all want to write and specifically write for print. And then I go, oh, great, you love all these magazines, the same magazines that I grew up loving and working for. What do your friends read? And then they look at me and they go, don't be silly, our friends don't read. And I was like, so where do they get their news from? And then they go, they just get it from TikTok. And that was actually the moment where I realized that if I wanted anyone below the age of 30 to actually know about my journalism, at least the stuff that I write about, I have to be on TikTok and I have to be on socials video, because it's not like the will isn't there to read. It's literally like there's been an entire media ecosystem that's been built for specifically people who are under the age of 30, where print doesn't even get a look in. They will only ever know about a cover story because someone's talking about it on TikTok, because someone's on Snapchat talking about it. So it's almost like there's this parallel universe of audience members, really, and people who are desperate to engage with high-quality content, but they just don't even know about the other stuff that the rest of the people in the media are doing, because there's no incentive for them to invest in the teams and the kind of thought processes and strategy to reach that audience. And it's a real shame. And I think it is starting to change. You see a lot of legacy media organizations. The New York Times are starting to do really interesting things with social video, like really investing so much money, so much resources into it. The Wirecutter strand, which is like kind of affiliate marketing and kind of shopping reviews. I think that team has like dozens of people on their team. And that is incredible for something that is just essentially a shopping vertical. But they put the resources and they see the dividends, because that's what you need to do. It's not just an afterthought where you're like, oh, we hired a 24-year-old, we guess they can do social video, let's just put them in charge. No, you need to give people proper resources, teams, and support, because if they make a mistake or they want to try something new, they need to know that they can be supported by people higher up in the organization who can kind of protect them from kind of people at the senior levels who are freaking out because they did a tiny mic interview and something went a little bit awry.
I'm voting for a session at Sheffield next year where we have the New York Times video team, because they went from not doing any social video to ramping it up with an unbelievable pace, and it's like spectacular now. Hind, where do you stand on social and some of the innovations that are happening in terms of the models? Both social is playing a role in filling a vacuum where traditional legacy media or broadcasters perhaps aren't reporting on stories, but there are also interesting models like Newsphere, Substack. Share your thoughts.
So I'm currently straddling both. So I absolutely love making news documentaries and working in that world and having that freedom and environment to be able to work with people, tell their stories with nuance and have the platform to put it forward. But as we know, it's very, very difficult. And no matter where I've worked, whether it's Sky, Vice, or Al Jazeera, it's constantly the general accepted scenario is that you're being subsidized by commercial or you're being subsidized by TV, and it's not a money-making industry. News documentary isn't making money. I don't think the BBC's documentary strand or Al Jazeera is making loads of money from advertisement, although a Sky News opening documentary department is very interesting as well, because I think people are looking into new models, and also digital is playing such a huge role. Someone told me recently that actually advertisement online has now surpassed TV advertisement, and that's something that will be huge and will potentially shift where money is coming from and how things are changing. And I totally agree in terms of how we are communicating with audiences beyond the traditional broadcast audience, but beyond the people that tune into TV, and engaging with people online is super important. But then TikTok does a really good job of it, but it's high censorship. I had multiple videos, woke up one day, multiple videos had been taken down. There was no opportunity for me to appeal it. There was nothing in there that I thought was that controversial. And we know that with the algorithms on Instagram, if your particular topic that you are covering is very often it doesn't have reach. I can see the insights of what can go out and what doesn't go out. A selfie will do way better than posting any political content. So there's also a need to be able to, if you're covering certain stories, if you're covering Gaza, if you're covering, Ukraine, then we do need other avenues to be able to look into how we're going to engage with audiences. And so what Newsphere is doing is it's a subscription-based service for journalists to be able to put their content out there. And the idea is that the subscription, you get half of the subscription fee, or you get a lot of the subscription fee, and with that you're able to be able to go out and do your own journalism. And I think we're going to start seeing more and more people coming forward with ideas and innovation and we're at the beginning of this, right? And very often, even with Vice and the way that it started, where things end up is not where it started. And I think we do need more ideas, and we need to be able to delve into those places. And I remember when I was at Sky, I started at Sky maybe 16 years ago, and people were talking back then, it's all about digital. Nobody's going to be watching TV. Live TV is going to end. And it was literally, tomorrow we're going to wake up and they might have just sacked everybody on live TV. And it was all just going to be online, and it didn't, and it's still there. But they have made these big moves to try and engage more with socials, to be able to put content out there. And they've also started realizing that it's not just taking a TV news report and putting it online, and that you have to do all the things that you were talking about. You have to be able to engage directly with your viewers and know what they are watching. But I do think that there's so much more room. There's still situations, I think, where people could be doing a much better job at being able to engage with an online audience, and knowing that you need experts in that field. You need people who know what they're saying. You need to be able to hire specifically in that field. When we make docs, for example, with Al Jazeera, we engage with social platforms, and we engage with what we're going to do, and we have 30-second trailers, and there are teams built around that, but I think there's a long way to go, and there's a lot to capitalize on and take advantage of as well.
But there's also so much room for creativity. So one of the channels that I love is this channel called Planet Money, which I think is from NPR, yes. And it's economics journalism, it's finance journalism basically. But what they do is they've basically started doing very funny, entertaining kind of comedic sketches about serious financial news. So you'll get a kind of very funny Adam and Joe style kind of very experimental film, but actually what they're doing is trying to explain the subprime mortgage crisis. So it's really innovative stuff, and there's also so much creativity, because there's no right or wrong way to do things right now. A lot of people think in order to get virality, you need to follow all these different templates, you have to buy into the trending sounds, but actually, if you have a good idea, and if it's interesting and very different to the kind of stuff that's out there currently on social media, it will take off and fly. I remember seeing, someone like Andrew Callahan who's doing Channel 5, and that is basically sort of a kind of Louis Theroux-ish take on tiny mic interviews. But again, it's kind of combined with a very like Vicey sensibility where he's going to these kind of quite weird and wacky events. So, you know, there's so much room for innovation and creativity if people just want to take a China chance on it, to kind of give people the funds, to give people the support, to explore things that haven't been explored before.
And I think that's really important, because I guess the thing that we're constantly fighting against is, you know, what are we making? Are we making what's in the interest of the audience? Or are we making what the audience are interested in? If we're going to be driven by views and by clicks and viral sounds or viral videos, then we're going to be back in a situation where we're struggling to get the things that we want to put out, because people are going to say, how many people are watching that? Did you get views on that? Did you get 1 million views? Did you get 500,000? But the idea is that if you can come up with an idea and do it in a creative way that can engage with an audience, and that potentially opens it up more. But I do think that's still something that we need to be aware of, because even when at Vice, it was, how many views did you get? Like, what is it? How's it doing on socials? How's it doing on YouTube? And as, you know, as journalists or as filmmakers, we want to be able to make films and news documentaries that we think aren't necessarily things that people are watching in their droves, but is definitely important and contributes to something really important in societies and in the conversation.
I think just on that as well, and we were chatting, but I think this might be the next point I was about to say, but I think what's been really interesting in this lens of like what we're making in the interest of the audience or the interest of the platform is then how the right wing have like surpassed all of that narrative.
Yes. Tell us about Angel.
So there are leading right-wing voices now that have extremely, extremely prominent podcasts, newsletters. They're building their own media infrastructure. They couldn't get their dismissive views put on major platforms because it was seen as racist and illogical. So they made their own media ecosystems, and they just completely surpassed those different gatekeepers. And they are thriving in these environments of digital engagement, of creating new forms of media direct to consumer and direct to audience relationships, and not having to kind of go via any of the official platforms to come through. I love a fun poll, but who's ever heard of a film called Am I a Racist? Okay, this is exactly what I'm chatting about. Am I a Racist is the highest grossing documentary in US theatres for the last 10 years. It's grossed so far reportedly over $12.5 million, surpassing all the kind of Michael Moore films, everything else. And it's literally a film about a guy who goes across America challenging DEI. Am I a racist if I say this? I've refused to watch the whole film, so I don't want to give him the views or the money, but I've seen clips of it. $12.5 million, highest grossing documentary in US theatres for the last 10 years. And yet every single person in this room, not one person I think put their hand up then, has even heard of the film, let alone seen the film, because it's nowhere in our environment of understanding from our current digital ecosystems. So the right wing are thriving in this ability to go direct to consumer, to build their own audience demographics, to build their own entire media studios, fund the work directly from their audience who is there. And if you think about kind of how powerful that could be, if we could do the same mechanism for impactful storytelling. If we're not able to get those films on platforms in terms of the big streamers or the big broadcasters, why isn't there additional ecosystems that we can build directly with those audiences? Because the right wing are using it to dramatic effect. That man followed up with a film, Am I a Woman?, to talk about the trans rights and LGBT issues in America, and that also grossed $4 million or something like that in its opening weekend. So we have to find a way as an industry to kind of model what we're seeing in the utter diatribe of what they're making huge amounts of money, getting huge amounts of views. How do we take that and kind of propel it back into our side of the industry to kind of bring viewership in that direction?
And it's exciting. I mean, listening to you, I'm buzzing. I think it is a tough time, but there are a lot of opportunities. I think we have to have the humility to go to the places that maybe other people's turn their nose up. Social, look at the strategies of people that we don't align with and understand how they're communicating. I'm going to come to the audience for questions, so please get them ready. I'm going to open Slido. Just as they do prepare their questions, I want to ask each of you, what advice I'm going back to the title of the notion of Changemakers. Everything is changing. And what advice would you have for everyone in the audience on how to prepare for a moment of change in their own lives if they're needing to pivot in response to the wider change in the ecosystem?
I think that in order to prepare for change, it's just to accept that change is inevitable. There's a famous quote in the Leopard. It's like, for things to stay the same, they have to change. And I really believe that looking at lots and lots and lots of different industries and getting out of your echo chamber is really key. Like, what is the tech industry doing? What are all these other industries, you know, business, publishing, you know, as well as general film and entertainment TV, what are they doing to prepare for the next generation while also maintaining their values and traditions? So yeah, get out of your echo chamber and accept that change is inevitable.
I'd say like diversity of both revenue and kind of format. So even as a business of Together Films, it's two separate businesses under one brand. We have a sales and distribution label, and we also have a marketing and impact agency that works like a publicity firm. So it's two different versions of revenue generation. It's two different ways of operating. Sometimes we work with major studios. Sometimes we work with producers. There's a diversity in like what we do and how we generate revenue and content. And I think as producers and directors, kind of having when I mentor at NFTS, I always say like, in the summer, it's a great time to go film weddings as like a joke, but it's really true. Like you can spend 3 months over the summer filming a wedding every weekend, and you have enough revenue to then make the films you want to make for the other 9 months of the year. And people feel really embarrassed to say that's what they're doing. And I'm like, that's genius, mate. You've got 3 months of solid income coming in, and you can then cover the incredible investigation that's going to take 6 months. We shouldn't look down on people for doing that. We shouldn't be questioning someone for having a really great strategic brain about keeping themselves sustainable. I think everybody would have seen the report that came out from the film, I think it was Film and TV Charity commissioned it. The average producer working in the UK right now, both fiction and docs, earns an average of £13,900 per year from their producing activities. So inherently, we need to find a way of having a multitude of routes to revenue and funding, and also being celebratory of that and not dismissive about those opportunities.
Anyone who hasn't seen 112 Weddings, it's a great doc. Have you seen it?
There you go.
Many, many weddings filmed. Hind?
I would say have conversations with other people, with other change makers, because I mean, this industry can often feel like a very lonely industry when you're sat there just with your thoughts in your head, thinking about what's wrong with it and all the obstacles that you're facing, and then you'll go and you'll meet somebody who's also in the industry, somebody who you know very well, and you have conversations and you realize it's not as lonely as you thought it was, and that there are lots of people who are having the same ideas as you and they're having the same thoughts. And I think whenever I get in those environments and the different groups that I'm in, it definitely feels uplifting, and it definitely feels like we can have a moment of change and we can create new things. And so definitely when you feel like you're alone and you're struggling, know that there are many people who are in that same boat. Reach out to them, and I think that's from where communities form and revolutionary things can happen.
Yeah, I'll repeat a piece of advice I got from Sharmadean Reid from Channel 4. She was my mentor for a while, and this was at the start of my career, and I was quite self-conscious about my accent because I wasn't born in the UK. And she looked at me and she was like, what if your accent is the thing, what if the thing that makes you different is also the thing that makes you stand out? And I always remember that because it made me realize that the ways in which I felt othered within the media industry are also the things that are kind of assets. And I think that that's a really important thing to hold on to, because there are so many ways the media industry, film, TV, makes you feel like you don't fit in, but sometimes those are the things that make people remember you and that make you stand out.
Over to you guys. Yay. Well done. So we've got a few minutes for questions. Please put up your hand very high so I can see you, and we will come to you with mics. Where?
Right in the front.
Yeah, right, bottom row here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Sadia Vani. First of all, I want to thank you for that lovely talk. It has been really insightful. I am a broadcast journalism student here at the Uni of Sheffield, and just like you, Hind, I have also grown up watching my community and my people on mainstream media because I'm a Kashmiri. And I've also always felt the need to tell my own story, and I'm really interested in news documentaries. And you mentioned that there's sometimes trouble in getting stories commissioned, like a one-and-done thing. But then how do you get a story commissioned or a theme commissioned that's not even talked about at all, or in a market where the target audience might not necessarily be present, because you can't be making those films in the market where the target audience actually is?
Thank you for coming. Really appreciate that. Lovely to meet you. Not getting things commissioned is one and done, but it's also beyond that. It's also about funding. The BBC, Channel 4, Al Jazeera do not have an unlimited budget. They do have to pick what they can put out. They've got, a series might have 7, 8 episodes, so they can't make 7 episodes on Gaza. Like, that is just the reality. So it's difficult, to do that. But I think, first of all, building on your craft, building on networking. I did just say journalism is a very elitist industry, but there are lots and lots of great people. And one of the advice that I always give students is find your safe space. Find the people that you can talk to. Find the people that you can reach out to, brainstorm with, and that they're going to listen to your ideas. And from that, you can build a community, reach out to people, and keep pitching. What I did when I first started out, I just got the names of every single news organization and who was running what, and sent mass emails catered to each one. And a lot of people did reply. But also, beyond, in terms of documentary, beyond the broadcasters, raising funding is something that a lot of people have experience in and can do, and reach out to particular organizations that have fundings for documentaries. There are places, like not necessarily like British Council, or like more nuanced and niche places that provide funding for documentaries that are not in the mainstream, that are great ideas, and just keep pushing forward with it. It's a long road, but it's really, really important that these stories are told, and there's definitely a market for it, and there's definitely an interest for it.
Thank you so much.
Here, gentleman in the third row.
Thank you. Hello, thank you for a lovely panel. It's been great and very insightful to listen to you all. My question is, I believe the main contrast at authentic storytelling, to use the buzzword, is the battle between honesty and reach. And I just wondered what vertical direction can take us away from that conflict and propel us forward.
I think it depends on what you mean by reach, right? So if reach is purely defined as you want millions of random people on YouTube to end up watching your video, then that is going to inevitably come into conflict with kind of honesty and authenticity. But if you define reach as, I am really determined to reach a certain community, for that to gain traction there, then you have a very different kind of equation in front of you. So if you say, I'm going to make a film about, the LGBTQ plus community, and I want it to be the thing that is talked about in the community for, months, basically. I'm going to target specific channels. I'm going to target specific influencers, specific publications. I'm going to cater a marketing strategy towards that community specifically. Then that's very different from being I'm going to have to water down my content so it's not as kind of edgy or radical as I want it to be, because I want, mum and dad and Joe Blogs from down the street to be able to watch it. So I think it's kind of about defining the terms of that kind of equation. What is most important to you? Who do you want specifically to watch this kind of stuff? It goes back down to, what you were saying about who is the audience for this, because it can't just be everybody.
Yeah.
Can I add to it as well, which is the metric really is the success of conversion of that specific audience, because doing what you said is exactly how I would launch a film as well. If it was I want to target women who have adopted children of a different ethnicity to watch this film, I'd be like, what is the conversion? If I know that total audience size is 1 million, how many of them watched it? Was it 80%? Was it 60%? Was it 20%? Rather than just being I'm going to target this audience and see what happens. It's almost like creating the North Star metric of, I need this amount of people in this audience to basically convert to it, and the necessary publications, everything you said.
I guess to define reach is more to do with how do you protect the artist and also serve the audience. It's because there's a balance, obviously, as we know, of understanding how we want to communicate and be commissioned, which is often based on an audience pool or specific data, but also there's a level of the artistry in the expression that person wants to communicate. And I just wondered, I know it's always going to be a constant battle, hence the conflict, but maybe the vertical ways that you have moved away from that and been able to balance it in the best way.
I just want to add something Petra Costa said last night, which I thought was really great. She said, trying to please everyone is a recipe for disaster, and I think we can all agree, anyone who's seen her films, they have a very authentic voice, and she's really stuck to that. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
I think it comes back to what we sort of said on the previous response, is that it's really, really difficult to make something that's going to appeal to everyone. The right wing are thriving on making stuff that I find disgusting, viscerally disgusting, but the audience they're serving absolutely love it, and they are being completely true to how disgusting they are, and that group are completely embracing it. So when you think about the sort of values that you have as a creator, you should absolutely understand like what you're happy to talk about, what you're not happy to talk about, where your moral line is of what you would accept doing or not accept doing. And as long as you're staying true to those values and what you're doing, there's a variety of ways in which you can create something from that moralistic position that holds true to who you are as a person. And then with the reach aspect, it's the quality versus quantity aspect, which is what Zing was saying. Like, we've had films where you screen them with like 10 politicians, and that can literally change the policy of a country from 10 humans. And at the same time, you have a film that needs to be seen by 1 million people to change like a consumer habit or practice. So the idea of reach and sort of who you're serving, like Greenpeace USA is one of our clients. We work directly with charities as well who are making their campaigns into full feature films, and they have strategic understanding of like what are the levels of power that we need to affect through this medium of communication and make something suitable to push that point.
And you've shared with me before a brilliant framework that you have. I wonder if you could speak to it, the targeted, affected, etc., the different verticals when you're thinking about audience and impact.
Yeah, so a lot of people in film and media use a conversation point around primary and secondary audiences, or core audience and affiliated audiences. So this really just starts with like, okay, who's the basic obvious people, or like singing within the choir that we are. But we find that quite reductive in terms of like impact planning. So when I wrote it out, it was a nice acronym, so I kept it, and it's spelled CAST. So commercial, affected, supportive, tactical. If you want to write it down, commercial, effective, supportive, tactical. So your commercial audience is like, who's going to show up in a cinema and pay 15 quid for a ticket? Not most people do that. The average person goes to the cinema 2.7 times a year. So you have Barbie in the summer, you have a Christmas movie, you have 0.7 of a film left to entice them to come in and watch your human rights documentary. There's only a very small number of people who will do that in a cinema-going audience. Affected is who's affected by those issues. If you're making a film about refugee rights, there may be an incredibly powerful and emotive refugee audience who want to see that, not necessarily buying tickets in a cinema, but may want to watch it through public broadcasting. Supportive of your NGOs or charities, and tactical, your political or like big power players. A tactical audience, you need to buy out a fancy venue, you need to provide wine and canapes, there needs to be an amazing speaker. It costs you 25 grand to get them to come and watch it. They're definitely not paying for that film. So rather than thinking primary and secondary, think commercial, affected, supportive, tactical. That's a much better framework for thinking about your audience engagement.
We have time for 2 more questions. Who wants to? Anyone? Question here.
It was just to get your thoughts. I don't know if it's a real question, but I was asked to look into VR as part of the kind of lead up for this, and it was a bit depressing because do you remember Chris Milk? He started off with this thing, he called it empathy deepening, and it was quite early stage in terms of the VR technology, and it relates to what you're talking about in terms of having a small group of influential people. You know, he created these kind of virtual experiences where he's talking with like people who have suffered sexual violence or displacement. And, you know, in the breakout room at Davos, you know, these guys are sitting down and they're like, holy shit, you know. All of a sudden they're transported to the Congo and they come out and they're like, they can go on and change the world. But it was sad to see that this guy had got involved with Jeff Skoll at Participant Productions. And, you know, these guys, they had a hatful of Emmys and Oscars and whatnot. But they folded like a year ago, almost to the day. And I just wonder what you have to think about that. Like, what does that mean? You know, these guys are making amazing work, you know, absolutely
intending to make the world a better place. And Jeff Skoll didn't sell Participant. He just closed the door. And Chris Milk, with all of his ambition for empathy deepening, has now been absorbed into Meta. And he's like, yeah, we realize we've created a technology for fitness. And now you can put VR goggles on and be transported to a virtual beach and knock boulders about and work on your glutes. And it's just fucking depressing.
Yeah. So I built a VR application in 2016, and during that time I was going to a lot of virtual experiences, including, which still I think about to this day, one where I was actually on a cargo ship with refugees crossing the channel, and I was sat on this bench, and it was 10 years ago, and I can remember it like it was yesterday. And having worked in tech, still in tech, what I would say is deep tech or frontier technology comes in waves and cycles, and there are casualties from the use cases of those cycles. So, for example, everyone's obsessed with Gen AI right now. AI has been around for a very long time, and the last wave of it was around the same time, 2015, 16, 17, before we had what everybody calls a second AI winter. It's only been in the last 12 months now that the use case for AI has rapidly accelerated beyond Moore's law principles in order to deliver how people are using AI on a daily basis today. And I think VR and AR, do you remember that, will potentially have similar waves as the technology develops. Do you get what I'm saying? And I don't know the ins and outs of the business that you've mentioned, but it sounds to me like it was a casualty of that wave. And I think the most important thing we can all agree on in this room is that storytelling will never die. It will just have different channels, different mediums, different formats, whether it's TikTok or whether it's a full immersive headset-free virtual reality experience, which is what is going to be the Black Mirror gold standard in the future. And I think as long as we in this room just keep writing and telling the stories, we will find the best medium format channel for those stories.
To pick up on the participant point explicitly, because I think that is a real shame for our industry that it no longer exists. I was in a taxi to their office at the moment that came out to divert the taxi and the directions. If those who don't know, Participant was an incredible business that ran for 20 years, founded by Jeff Skoll. They co-financed a number of leading documentaries and fiction films, Hidden Figures, The Help,
Inconvenient Truth. They started
with Al Gore and that amazing documentary. And they had huge success. One of the things that they didn't have in their business model at the time was a direct-to-consumer, direct-to-audience sales mechanism. All of the films that they released went through incredible partners, Magnolia, Universal, Lionsgate, Netflix. They didn't ever monetize directly to their consumer base, which I think when you look at the current economic situation was probably a misstep. The thing that I found most horrifying, though, was, I'm happy to say this publicly, Jeff Skoll hosted a party for Trump the day he got into office. So you have someone who created the bastion of sort of liberal arts funding for 20 years in the American market, and on the day that Donald Trump was inaugurated, he hosted a happy hour for him. So I think it's a case of not saying that there isn't a role for a fund like that to exist. I think there's a dramatic shift in the political will and understanding of certain financiers who feel like they have to be seen to be playing by the new rules of what's happening in the American political system. But I was personally pretty horrified when I saw that, and a lot of good friends worked at Participant and lost their jobs and have now moved into other places. But that was the thing that really sort of shocked me, was seeing him gleefully welcome Trump on his inauguration night from the person who kind of put Al Gore's work on an international public space.
Goodbye, Jeff Skoll. Hello, and goodbye to Changemakers. Thank you, everyone, for coming so much. Appreciate it.
I've always found it